What about red meat and diabetes? Well, it turns out, in looking at over 200,000 people for over 36 years, they found those with the highest level of red meat consumption and the highest incidence of type 2 diabetes.
All right, so I want to address this article and what I believe is a perfect example of what you would call broken science. But first, I got to address the elephant in the room. I know you are thinking of this as well.
Diabetes, 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 diabetes.
Thank you, Wilford. Diabetes, diabetes, diabetes,
Diabetes.
Diabetes.
This article came out of October 2023 out of the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. The problem with this article is not everyone has access to it. You have to pay for that article, which means a lot of people just aren't going to dive deep into it and look at it. However, I did. So while there was an increase in type 2 diabetes among people who ate more red meat, here's some of the problems with this study. Number one, they categorized red meat consumption as anything that contained red meat, whether it was unprocessed or processed, but it also included sandwiches, which also meant it included the bread and it also included refined carbohydrates. Number two, this was a self-reported study in which they asked people, which was healthcare professionals, what was your average intake of each food or beverage over the past 12 months? Honestly, guys, can you remember what you ate last week? Number three, the people who had a higher red meat intake also had a 32% up to 40% more caloric intake too. People in the higher red meat consumption also exercised considerably less. People that were in the higher red meat consumption also had a higher body mass index. It can also be assumed that they probably had more body fat. And the reason why is because they had a higher body mass index and also exercised less, which means they weren't going to be putting muscle on. The group that ate the highest amount of red meat also had the highest amount of alcohol intake. And the group in the highest red meat intake also took less multivitamins. I wonder if they just generally had a worse lifestyle overall. Now, I'm not an advocate of the carnivore diet, but when we're starting to draw these conclusions and saying that correlation equals causation, that's a perfect example of broken science. These people, they're not pointing it out. Are they just that illiterate, or do they have an agenda? Who knows?